everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am bringing you guys my end of October reading wrap up and a get ready with me. You guys have really been enjoying this new format of wrap ups that I've been doing, and I've really been having a good time at filming and uploading these as well. So I thought that I would just kind of keep that going, at least for the time being. So why don't we jump into the books that I've read in the last half of October. As usual, if you are curious about my mid-month wrap up where I discussed the books that I read in the first half of the month, that will of course be linked up in the cards above. So the first book that I have to talk about is Caressed by Ice by Milani Singh. This is book 3 in her Changeling series. I was really looking forward to getting to this third book because it sounds like a lot of people who love this series kind of unanimously agree that A, this is one of their top favorite books of the entire series, and B, that this is where the series really starts to get good. And I gave it 3 stars. I did not love it. It was actually my least favorite book of the series that I've read so far, and honestly, I've just accepted that this series just isn't for me. I don't feel all that connected to any of the characters, whether that be the 2 main characters, the hero and the heroine of this particular book, or really any of the side characters. I do find the world that this takes place in to be fairly interesting because we're dealing with a world where we've got humans that are the Psy, they have psychic abilities, then we have the Changelings, which are humans that can shift into different kinds of animals. We have a bunch of different kinds of Changelings, and then we have just regular humans. And just to be straight up with you guys, it's not good if the best thing about a series to me is the world. I want the romances and the characters to be what I truly love. I thought the first half of this was pretty good, like a solid 4 star, and then the second half I just did not care. I feel like that's blasphemy for me to say that because I know a lot of people who adore the couple that this book follows, and I just like, how many times do I have to say it? I just didn't care. So let's just quickly move on from talking about this book. The next book that I read was Razorblade Tears. This is by S.A. Cosby. So this is quite a different book from a lot of the books that I've read recently. This is a thriller. It's definitely a really raw and gritty novel. We are centering around 2 main characters. We have Ike, who is a black man, and Buddy, who is a white man. They live, it sounds like, where do they live? I want to say somewhere in like the deep south area. And basically their sons are both gay, and they got married to each other. And Ike and Buddy never fully accepted their sons for who they were. And it turns out that they both get murdered in this seemingly random drive-by shooting. And something else that I want to set up is that Ike and Buddy both were in prison at one point in their lives, and so they decide to collaborate to find the people that killed their sons and kill them themselves, basically. And this was absolutely genius. I've never read a book quite like this before. This is definitely a thriller. There are some scenes that will keep you on the edge of your seat. This is one of those books that the thrilling scenes definitely take you by surprise because it seems like we're kind of settling into some kind of routine, and then all of a sudden like shit just goes bad. And you know, there's all kinds of like fight scenes, definitely lots of blood and violence and things like that. Definitely know that going into it. I think the shining star for this book is Ike and Buddy's growing friendship, because at the beginning of the book they really only meet for their son's funeral. I don't think either of them went to their son's wedding. And so they meet there for the first time. They are seemingly 2 very different people with seemingly very different kinds of prejudices, but throughout the novel they learn that they're more similar than they think, and they also learn and grow together as people. Something else that I briefly want to bring up about this book before moving on to my next read is I loved how this book explored grief, because for me it just felt very unique. I don't think I've ever read a book like this where we have a parent grieving for a child that they never fully accepted, and I can only imagine the pain that you would feel knowing that your child never felt fully loved by you before they passed away. So good. Cannot recommend it this highly enough. Absolutely fantastic. So the next book that I want to discuss is 44 Chapters About 4 Men. This is a memoir by B.B. Easton. This is the book that inspired the Netflix series Sex Life, so I was really excited about reading the source material after watching season 1 of that show. And going into it, I knew that it was going to be very different from the show, and let me just tell you, it truly is. The show definitely has a much more serious tone to it, whereas this book is just hilarious. Like, yes, there are some serious topics discussed, but overall it is just a funny book, and it's just, oh, it was so good. So this is about our main character, BB, of course, because it is a memoir. But I do want to point out that the author said that she changed names, and I think some situations were exaggerated for the book. So it's not like a true memoir, it's more fiction than that, I would say. But basically the whole catalyst for this book is that she's married to this really great guy. They have 2 kids together, I think, at this point. Everything is perfect except that he straight up just does not rock her world in bed. I think I'm gonna leave it at that. And so she decides to kind of vent about that in like a diary on her laptop. The husband reads it, and she knows that the husband reads it because all of a sudden he's doing things to her that she wrote about other guys doing to her in the past. So she then decides to write like a different journal of not completely fictitious things, but she really exaggerates experiences that she had with past boyfriends to see how far she can push her husband, basically, and hilarity ensues. Yeah, I don't think I've laughed this hard reading a memoir before. It was just so good. I personally enjoyed this more than the show. I have a lot of issues with the show, and I know I'm not the only one that thinks that, because the main character in the show is just so frustrating, whereas BB, you can't help but love her. I know that B.B. Easton wrote 4 separate books about the 4 boyfriends that are talked about in this memoir, and I'm really excited about reading those books now, because I was so enthralled and just captivated when she was talking about these past boyfriends. Like, it was so good. Okay, so next I read 2 really short Halloween erotic novellas. The first one is Treat. This is by Shay Sanders, I believe, who is a Black author. You can find this on KU. You can find all of the novellas that I'm going to talk about in this video on KU, by the way. So the plot of this, it does take place on Halloween night. We have an established couple. Their relationship is going really well, but the hero, I can't remember character names. You guys know I'm terrible at this, but the hero knows that he's just deeply in love with the heroine, and he wants to eventually propose marriage to her, but he knows that she is not about that marriage life. And so to kind of persuade her to change her mind about it, he decides to spice things up in the bedroom, and he does this by taking her to this sex club, and he gets this woman who is known as a pleasure guide to spend the night with them. So it is an FFM erotic novella. It does have a happily ever after, but it's not a poly romance. So it's a happily ever after for the established couple. And yeah, this was just a fun time. Gave it 4 stars. This kind of had a very unique vibe to it because I've never read something like this, like having a pleasure guide and things like that. I thought that that was very unique. And then the other novella that I read after that was Seduced by Death. I do not remember who the author was, but it will be over here. So as you can tell by the cover, I thought that this was just gonna be straight up stupid and ridiculous, and it kind of is, but joke's also kind of on me because I ended up really enjoying this, and I actually wanted it to be longer than it was. It was only like 20 pages, and it's about our main character Kanza. She is a necromancer, I think, but she also works as like an ER nurse or doctor, and so basically she can heal people with her abilities, which isn't good because then our hero is death, like literally looks like a Grim Reaper. And he doesn't like that she's interfering with his work because she is saving people's lives that should be dying and going to him, right? And so they've been knowing each other for the past like 500 years. And in this novella, they finally give in to all of their sexual tension, and it was just a fun time, and I wanted it to be longer. I think I gave this 4 stars. Yeah, I would recommend it if you're in the mood for something like this. Next book I want to talk about is Fallen by Mia Sheridan. If you watched my most recent video, which was a video all about horror novels, horror novel recommendations, I'll link that up in the cards above, you will recall that I talked about this book quite a bit. So I'm not going to talk about it like too much in this video, but this was marketed to me as like a dark romantic suspense book about this woman who moves to this new town and moves into this really old kind of creepy house with her 7-year-old daughter. And let me just tell you right now, it is not romantic suspense. It is horror with a really sweet romance thrown into the mix. So yeah, we definitely have one of these like haunted house stories. This book just felt really unique to me because I don't know that I've ever read this kind of horror novel with this prominent of a romance before. And it's really interesting because our hero, he's a deputy in the police department, and he's a very sweet guy, but he also has a very mysterious past. And so that's kind of one of the mysteries that we unravel throughout the book. And this also has a separate storyline having to do with Native Americans that previously lived on the land, I believe, that the house is on, or that the town is on, basically. And so this gives me vibes of like gothic thriller, gothic horror novels such as like Lock Every Door and Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. Also gave me vibes of The Broken Girls by Simone St. James, because in the past the house was this really messed up reform school for teenage girls. So yes, this book does get quite messed up at times, and honestly kind of scary. There's one scene in particular that is going to live in my head rent-free for like the rest of my life, so thank you, Mia Sheridan, for that. And like I said, the romance is really sweet as well. There's just like a lot going on here, and I think that Mia Sheridan balanced it all really well. So I gave this 5 stars. I've only read 2 books by Mia Sheridan. They were 2 very different books, and I've heard that she has quite the backlist. So I'm really looking forward to diving more deeply into her backlist because I am just absolutely obsessed with the 2 books that I read from her. Next book I want to discuss is Blue-Eyed Devil by Lisa Kleypas. This is book 2 in her Travis's series. So this is a contemporary series, which is something very different from Lisa Kleypas because she is mostly well known for her historical romances. I would also say that this series is more women's fiction because yes, there's romances in these books, but these books also center around the main character's life story a lot as well. But this book feels a lot different from Sugar Daddy, which was book 1. So this one is about our main character, Haven. She is one of the Travises that this series centers around. And then the hero is actually Hardy, who was featured a lot in Sugar Daddy, which was book 1. Something that I want to point out about this book right away is something that I was not expecting. In that at the very beginning of the book, Haven is already in an established relationship with this guy, Nick. And Nick is someone that Haven's father does not approve of, but she marries him anyway, and her father cuts her off financially, which isn't a very big deal to her because she wants to make her own way in life anyway. And this happens in the very beginning of the book, so I don't think this is a spoiler at all. I think it's something that you should know about before going in, is that basically she gets married to this guy Nick, and it turns into a very abusive relationship, both emotionally and physically abusive. It was hard for me to read at times. I just, you know, I wasn't seeing it coming. I don't know, this book didn't seem like it was gonna get that heavy, and then it did. And yeah, so definitely be aware of that before going in. And then, like I said, the hero is Hardy, and so he comes into the picture later on in the story. And I ended up giving this 5 stars. I really loved it. This series is so good so far from Lisa Kleypas. I've really only given a couple of books by her 5 stars actually. And yeah, this was really great. I will say though, I think that I still loved Sugar Daddy a little bit more, mainly because I loved Liberty's character so much. I really enjoyed Haven's character, but just not as much as Liberty. But it's still a fantastic story. I would also recommend trying this one out if you are one of those people that read Sugar Daddy and you didn't really like it all that much, because I've seen a lot of people give Sugar Daddy 3 stars and then they give this one 5 stars. I will also say that while I would still call this women's fiction, this one does center around the romance more than Sugar Daddy does. Alright, the next 2 books I want to talk about are the last 2 books in the Good Girl's Guide to Murder trilogy by Holly Jackson. So I read the second book, which is Good Girl Bad Blood. I was gonna say Good Girl Gone Bad. I feel like that's the title of another book. Anyway, so this one essentially picks up right where the first book left off. We have our main character, Pip. She solved a murder in the first book, and now she has created a true crime podcast where she investigates cold cases and tries to solve them. And so, yeah, I will say at the beginning of this book, I wasn't completely sold on the direction that this was going in, because at the very beginning, a brother of one of her friends goes missing. So this isn't very spoilery because it does happen at the very beginning. And I wasn't sold because I didn't have any connection to the person that went missing. I feel like he was mentioned quite a bit in the first book, but I do not recall his character being like heavily featured. So at first I was just kind of like, why should I care about this character going missing? But I have realized that I just need to trust Holly Jackson at this point, because definitely by like the 20% mark, I was completely captivated. I was completely in. I love the format that this series is told in, because it is like podcast style, and the audiobooks in particular, guys, are absolutely amazing because we get a full cast of voice actors, and so you really feel immersed in the story. I'm not exactly sure if I enjoyed this book more than book 1, but I will say that it's a fantastic follow-up. I feel like, you know, middle books in a series are always really tough to do. Most of them tend to be filler in some way, and this one totally is not. So I had to give it 5 stars. And then the third and final book I read right after that, which is As Good as Dead. I love this cover because you see there's duct tape, and the parts that have duct tape are shiny. Like, that is so cool looking. So obviously I can't talk too much about what happens in this third and final book, because that would spoil things that happened in the other 2 books. But what I will say is that this book goes in a very different direction from the first 2. And while I did give this book 5 stars, I'm still not sure if I'm a huge fan of the direction that this book went in. Especially like right about the 50% mark, this book turns into a completely different kind of thriller. I don't know if I've mentioned that, but this is a YA thriller trilogy. And I don't know. I really don't know how to feel about it. I think I need to maybe read some other reviews on Goodreads and see how people view the way that this book ended the series. So I mean, overall, do I recommend this series? Absolutely. I think it is just a great YA thriller series. I haven't found that many YA thrillers that I truly love, but this really is one of them. Even though obviously I have my conflicting thoughts about how the third book ended things, I still really loved this series and highly recommend it. So next up, I actually have all of the books that I read for the Halloween Smutathon. I do have a reading vlog that I just released a couple of days ago, so I definitely recommend watching that video if you want to hear me talk in depth about any of the books that I'm about to bring up. But I will just kind of briefly wrap up what I thought about those books. So first up was Don't Hex and Drive by Juliet Cross. This is book 2 in her Stay a Spell series. I absolutely loved this book. Again, if you watch my reading vlog, you will see that I have basically found a new book boyfriend in Devraj, our hero. He is a vampire. This was a paranormal romance series, by the way. He's a vampire. He was also a Bollywood star, and he is just everything. I love him so much, and I just love Juliet Cross's writing style. I love the group of characters that we're centering around. This mainly centers around the Savoy sisters. I believe there's 6 of them. They are witches. This also takes place in New Orleans, which is just the perfect setting for a paranormal romance series. Yeah, it's amazing. I could go on and on. Also for this readathon, I read a bunch of novellas, like Halloween-y kind of themed novellas, because I love doing that for readathons, because that puts my book count up basically. But the first one that I read that I want to talk about a little bit is Sanguine by Sierra Simone. I surprisingly have not read much from Sierra Simone. Now, I've only read Porn Star, which was a book that she wrote with Laurel and Page, and then yeah, this is the first thing that I've read just by her, but I definitely plan on reading more. This is basically just a novella about a vampire named Bastian and an ex-priest slash vampire hunter named Aaron, I believe. And yeah, this is just really quick, definitely Insta love going on. It was really great. It was only about like 50 pages. Another novella that I read for this readathon was She Did the Monster Mash by K.M. Strange. This is essentially like a reverse harem novella. We have a main character who's just obsessed with Halloween, which I was so here for. I just loved like this almost like childlike giddiness that she got from Halloween. She just adores this holiday, as so many of us do. And it's just her having sexy times with numerous different people throughout the night. Yeah, so I gave this one 4 stars, gave Sanguine 4 stars, by the way. Let's see, another novella that I read for this readathon was Just for Halloween by Roxanne Riley. This is an MMF poly romance actually, and it's just about 70 pages, but it gives you everything that you could want from a poly romance. We have an established couple, I believe their names are Summer and Ben, and on Halloween night they decide to bring in a guy into the bedroom for one night, but it turns out that they actually really like this guy Nick, and so starts a poly relationship. It was unexpectedly sweet. I just expected this to be, you know, kind of a one-night stand deal. Didn't expect for there to be like a happily ever after with this throuple. Next up we have All the Queen's Men. This is by Kay Lorraine. This is a reverse harem. This is also a fantasy romance story, and I'm not going to go too in depth about the plot, but we have Maeve who, when she turns 21, she comes of age and is set to be the queen of this kingdom, but in order for her to take the throne, she has to go through some trials, and she also meets these 4 men that end up being in her harem. This was just a really great time. Gave this 4 stars as well. Highly, highly, highly recommend the audiobook because it has a full cast of narrators, and the cast includes some of my absolute favorite audiobook narrators such as Teddy Hamilton. So yeah, this was just really, really great. Then next book that I can recall reading for that readathon was The Dare by Harley LaRue. Oh my goodness, easily one of my favorite reads from the readathon. This is a novella that got banned on Amazon, although I think that that's absolutely ridiculous after reading it, because I've read just as crazy things off of Kindle Unlimited, at least. Like, there's just a lot of crazy things on Amazon, and I don't think that this is like the worst thing out there in terms of like dark and taboo romances. So this is about our main characters Manson and Jess, I believe the heroine's name was, and essentially this is taking place a few years after high school, and when they were in high school, Manson was kind of a loner. Jess definitely bullied him quite a bit, and so now a few years later they are at this Halloween party. Like, all of the people that they went to high school with are at this party, and they find themselves in this game of beer pong where some of the cups are labeled dare, and so if somebody gets their ball into one of those cups, the other person has to do whatever dare they come up with. And so there's a lot of like humiliation kink going on in this novella, and we also follow them at this party like after that game is over, and things get kind of crazy. There's definitely lots of kinks going on in this novella. There's also these guys known as the losers who are Manson's best friends, and they show up dressed as clowns. So I thought I would mention that because I know a lot of people like absolutely despise clowns. And oh man, I mentioned this in the vlog, but I just was absolutely enthralled by the writing and by the story, by these characters. Lots of steamy times, of course. Like, it was just like so good. But at the same time, I know that this is not for everybody. Like, definitely look up the content warnings for yourself. Harley LaRue is very clear about them before the novella starts, so you can get a sense of if this novella would be for you, basically. This is Halloween Boo by Sarah Spade. It is very thinly veiled Hocus Pocus fan fiction about our main character Danny and this ghost Zachary who lives in her apartment with her. This actually ended up being a really sweet romance with a unexpectedly solid plot twist. I did not expect for there to be any plot twist, so there's that. Had a good time with it. I gave it 3.5 stars though, just because it wasn't as good as other like 4-star books that I've read, but it was still like solid. Then I also read Gothicana by Rue Nix. This is a very chunky book. This was like 450 pages. This is also a dark academia gothic romance about our main character Corvina. When she's 21, she gets this mysterious handwritten letter inviting her to attend Varenmore University, which is a university that takes place at this crazy gothic castle. And she has this forbidden romance with one of her professors, but it's a little bit less forbidden than it sounds, just because he's only like 28 and she's, like I said, 21, and he's a doctoral student, so he's technically still a student at the university, so it's not quite as taboo as it originally sounds like it's going to be. And this was just amazing. Like, I just loved the gothic vibes. I just couldn't get enough of the atmosphere and the vibes. And yes, this is not the most fast-paced book out there, but I wouldn't expect a 450-page romance novel to be all that fast-paced. And it's definitely not plot driven. It's definitely more character driven, even though there is like more of like a suspenseful B plot going on. And it's very spicy, and it was just a really good time. Highly recommend it. Although you may not love it as much as I did. I feel like there's a lot of people out there that gave this 3, maybe 4 stars. Something I also want to mention about this book is that you will not get all of your questions answered, and that does, and I understand this, but you know, that does frustrate readers a lot. I personally like books that keep me guessing until the end or even after the end. I have no problem with, you know, not having all of my questions answered. But I did hear that Rue Nix is apparently planning on writing a sequel. I have no idea if it'll be about different characters or like what, but apparently she's not done with this world and this story. All right, and last but certainly not least, I want to talk about Girls Weekend. I do not know how to pronounce the author's last name, so I'm not even going to attempt it. The picture is over here. But this is a novella about 3 elves, and they go on this girls' weekend to this nudist resort where a bunch of orcs live or hang out at, and they each have fun times with some orcs. So this is a monster romance. One of the characters definitely gets a happily ever after. The 2 other ones, not so much, but I know that this author is planning on writing at least one other book in this little series. It was a fun time, just about 200 pages. I think you'll fly through it. So yeah, I settled on giving this 4 stars. I thought it was just a really fun time, and those are all the books that I read in the second half of October. I hope that you guys enjoyed this Get Ready With Me wrap up. I would love it if you would leave a comment down below if you want to tell me about some of the books that you read in October and books that you really loved. I always love getting recommendations from you guys, and I would love it if you would leave a like and subscribe. I thank you so much in advance if you do, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!